Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. Explosions covered the entirety of Konoha, not just the arena as those present during the final test thought. A cloud of smoke and dust covered the hidden village, ironically concealing it from sight. Rubble and rocks rained on the streets a moment later while the sound of buildings falling due to the damage done echoed through them. In the aforementioned stadium, the civilian public panicked just as they did outside the building. The ninja, however, were prepared. Even those unaware of the impending attack were ready in a matter of seconds. Even in their casual clothes, a shinobi always held a weapon of some sort on their person for moments such as this. The higher-ups, commanders, Anbu, elite and regular jounin were concerned, however. None of their intel said anything about an attack like that. How had the snake managed to put explosives everywhere? Their doubts were answered quickly. Those ninjas stationed on their borders, waiting for the invasion to happen, were the first to see a possible reason. Their enemies appeared the second the first bomb was detonated, signaling the start of something that nobody was looking forward to except those that organized it. Oto and Suna Ninja charged in, ready and more than willing to fight. The surprise came from the third group though. Konoha had feared it just like Kiri and Iwa had, if more. The remaining nation had not wanted to be left out, apparently. The cloud had come to the leaf. Patrols hurried to get the word out. Everyone needed to know this, lest they be caught off guard. Especially the leaders. Because, with all the Kiges present in the village, how could the Reikage not be around? Furthermore, with all that going on, there was no way the cloud hadn't brought their best weapons, their Jinchuriki. All the while, the mastermind behind all the chaos rejoiced, aware of everything that was going on. It had all been his plan for a long time and it was oh so satisfying to see it finally came to be. Orochimaru stood on top of what remained of the place that had held the Kige's balcony overseeing the arena. In front of him, looming over Konoha, were three of the biggest members of the Snake Clan. A second after he summoned it, a purple barrier rose around him, trapping him and the other village leaders inside it before the cloud of dust that remained from the explosion could even clear. His elite students had done their job. Beautiful, isn't it, Sensei? Orochimaru asked, gleefully looking around. To think this day really came, the aged Hokage sorrowfully replied, ignoring the question. His white robes having been destroyed by the explosion, revealing his battle attire underneath. You know what they say about snakes, Hiruzen the diminutive Sushikage grumbled, looking like nothing had happened. Understandable, considering that powerful and equally terrifying bloodline selection of his. You have to cut off the head, finished a very clearly irritated Mitsukage, contrasting the rather calm demeanor of her older counterparts. All over her, ashen pieces detached from her body, revealing that she had a layer of ashes acting as armor to protect herself from the explosion. And burn the body, she added, the ground around her scorching hot. Rather presumptuous of you, Orochimaru Onaki continued. To think you can attack not one, not two, but three Kiges at the same time by yourself. Oh, that's where you are wrong. The disgusting smile on the snake's face stretched even wider at that. I didn't come alone. Not at all, did I? His question received no answer, but as the cloud of dust behind him was blown away by the wind, it revealed the meaning behind his words. Greedy bastard, the Sushikage spat out venomously. You thought I would just stand away while all of you allied yourselves against me? Oh, the Raikage questioned with a raised eyebrow. Oh no. That simply won't do. So, he's delusional too, Mai pointed out with a snarl. Just great, isn't it? No, Hiruzen denied with a shake of his head. That's just an excuse. You just wanted a chance to attack Konoha, didn't you? Oh. The lack of an answer was enough for everyone present. And I'm not done yet, Orochimaru interjected with a laugh that set the three opposing Kages on edge. Now, you see. Shut up already. The Mitsukage shouted, and with merely a wave of her hand, lava formed from the ground. A small wave of the melted substance rushed towards the missing Nin, stopping short of hitting him as what seemed to be coffins rose from the very ground. How rude, Orochimaru mockingly said from behind them. Across from him, all three of the leaders tensed up, and even his ally seemed uneasy at the sight. So, it was true, the leaders all thought, with no delusions about what was to happen. They knew, all along, that there was no stopping that from happening. The snake wouldn't have let such an important step in his plan fail, even if they had all rushed at him. Long time no see. Sau, one of the figures that walked out of the coffins, said, once it had opened. You've aged, Saru. To be another one, next to the first added. To think this would be the result I reached, the third said bitterly. I never thought I would see you two again, the third Hokage told his predecessors, the first two to have stepped out in the open. And under such circumstances. Was this what you wanted, Rosa? Onaki asked the third one mockingly. If it'll bring down Konoha and prosperity towards Suna, my death will be worth it, the fourth Kazekage replied. He really believes that, doesn't he? Mai questioned, disbelieving. Your agent did an amazing job, Orochimaru commented out loud, drawing the attention of the other Kages. She really did, the Raikage answered, with a touch of pride in his voice. She is my best saboteur, after all. You flatter me, Raikage Sama, a feminine voice said from outside the barrier. When every eye moved to the side, they were greeted by the sight of the Jinchuriki of the two tails. Not a word, be cautioned when a second figure joined the woman. The brother of the current cloud leader making his presence known. Now, what'll you do, Hiruzen, while these two wreak havoc on your village? They'll be dealt with, just like everyone else. Oh, you think your Jounin will be enough? The Raikage asked, clearly not believing that for a second. Or maybe you think Jiraiya will? The snake questioned, clearly not worried about his ex-teammate. I'm sure my friends will entertain him long enough, he said, waving his hands towards his summons. Besides, he started once more, this time turning towards the Sushikage. You should be worrying about your supposed ally, shouldn't you? If you think I'll help the likes of you, Onaki spoke, growing increasingly more annoyed before Orochimaru interrupted him. Oh, but I have the perfect blackmail, don't I? You were even nice enough to bring her here for me, he added, making the old man's face pale as he turned towards where his granddaughter was supposed to be. Lower in the arena, the smoke had yet to completely clear, to the point where he couldn't see how much damage the building had suffered, never mind see Kurotsuchi herself. Now, if you help me, however, I promise. And he's supposed to believe you. Mai interrupted, clearly and understandably dubious about the trustworthiness of the missing Nin. As if anyone would be stupid enough to do that, Orochimaru. Shut up, Onaki interrupted, his eyes still locked down on the arena. Talk, snake, before I. This time, it wasn't any voice that interrupted the conversation. Instead, it was the sound of lightning and two figures jumping out of the cloud. The Kijis then were treated to the surprised expression of Orochimaru when the two people were revealed. One with blue hair in a spiky ponytail and green clothes while the other had white hair and lavender clothes. What happened next surprised all of the Kijis too, since both individuals quickly demonstrated that they had bloodline limits, the first, creating crystal projectiles, and the second, displaying the ability of the dead bone pulse. I thought the Kaguya clan had been killed off, Mai said, being the most shocked at the second's appearance. After all, it had been Kirigakyo that had exterminated the clan after they had attacked the village. Hiruzen, spectating the events and feeling glad that time was being wasted, noticed that Orochimaru let the chance to brag pass, something that he didn't expect from his student. That made it clear that those two were the ones that were supposed to threaten Onaki's granddaughter's life. From there, it was easy to tell that someone had messed with that plan. If he had to guess. A smirk formed on his face when the author of the lightning disturbance was revealed, walking alongside Kurotsuchi herself. Sasuke faced the Otonin while shrugging his shoulders casually. From where they stood, it was difficult to tell what was being said, but it was clear that a conversation was being shared between the Konoha and the Iwa ninja. You were saying, Snake. Onaki spat out, turning towards Orochimaru, clearly much angrier than he had been before. Thought you could threaten my family, did you? That brat, the snake muttered, ignoring the Sushikage. You! He exclaimed, turning towards the Jinchuriki. Take care of the Uchiha, the plan must. Lightning resounded again, this time much closer. Before anyone present could even find the origin of the sound, a black and red blur appeared by the pair of tailed beast containers. A split second later, the form of Ig Sato became clear as he kicked Ujitoni off to the side. The poor woman didn't even have time to react. You'll regret that, Brata growled, as Genin fell to the ground, standing in front of B. Spare me the threats, will you? The red-eyed boy shot back, said, eyes locked on the Jinchuriki of the Eight Tails. If you think Ujito will be taken out so easily, I'm sure my friends will entertain her long enough. Ig interrupted, and everyone was struck by the fact that he said almost the same thing Orochimaru had a moment before. Now, I'm sure you and I can have some fun, can't we, Killer B? He asked, but Hiruzen could see his nervousness clear as day. I'm afraid you won't have any fun, Iji-kun, Orochimaru answered, not even letting the Jinchuriki speak. You'll be too occupied. Then the man trailed off, apparently confused by something. What? Are you trying to use that mark of yours? Yeah, that won't work. The amused voice of the satyr seemed to shock the Sannin all over again, much to the amusement of all present Kijis, even his own ally. Fuck that thing. Although, thanks for the power-up, it's greatly appreciated. How? What did you do? The missing nin asked, clearly disturbed by whatever Ig had accomplished. The Hokage could only wonder if the boy's accomplishments were even more significant than he had thought, which was saying something already. A bit of this, a bit of that, Ig dismissed with a wave. So, will you keep acting as if you are cool? The Jinchuriki finally spoke, tilting his head to the side. Or will you finally start fighting, you fool? Instantly moving into his rather unique stance of Kenjutsu, with the grand total of 7 swords, which were held in places such as his mouth, the side of his neck, his stomach and so on. Well, if you say it like that. Ig replied, his nerves showing even more by the second. I guess I'll have to get on with it, huh? Hiruzen gave a sad smile as he saw the black markings of Orochimaru's seal spread over the boy's skin. The Hokage looked around, bitterly aware that his ninja wouldn't be able to come and help in time. Everyone had been stationed to deal with the invading ninja, to save as many of his people as they could. After all, they had already known that it was unlikely that they would be able to help the Kijis once Orochimaru's plan was enacted. They hadn't expected something equally as dangerous to be outside the barrier, unfortunately. Eventually the dark lines covered IG entirely, something that he hadn't yet been witness to. Once again, thanks for the power-up, Orochimaru the boy added, his voice turning deeper and setting even the Kijis on edge. His physical appearance changed slowly. The black skin slowly turned grey and then to almost white. His black hair grew slightly longer and even messier than usual. 2 short white horns appeared on his forehead, pointing at the sky. His red irises covered the entirety of his eyes, making the white disappear while his pupils turned snake-like. Still, all those were minor changes compared to what was added to his anatomy. From his back sprouted 4 pitch-black new limbs. While some might have compared them to the spiders he was contracted to Hiruzen they looked more like the arms of praying mantises, which made the image that much more unsettling. Let's not waste more time, okay? The now deep voice of the boy announced as he pulled the legendary sword from behind him. Lightning appeared at his feet, now darkened due to the cursed chakra coursing through him. And then, he rushed towards one of the most dangerous ninja on the elemental nations who replied in kind. Oh! Moments before, Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke was annoyed. Very annoyed, actually. He had been looking forward to his next battle. It was, after all, against IG. He knew it wouldn't have been that much of a battle, just like the Satters had been against Naruto. Both boys had agreed to pull their punches slightly, to save energy and all that. It was part of the reason why their match had been so short. Still, he had wanted to face IG. It wouldn't have been a real battle, he knew, just like he knew that he would probably lose that fight. Regardless of any of that, Sasuke had wanted to have that match anyway. It had felt important to him. Thus, he was annoyed. Even worse than the interruption was his mission for the day, issued by both IG and Shikamaru. I don't need your help, the girl next to him grumbled, and the Uchiha felt his eyes twitch. Get over it, Princess Sasuke told her, specifically using the nickname that IG had told him would annoy the girl. If he had to be annoyed, so did she. Besides, if she knows that the nickname comes from IG, who saved her before, she might trust you, if only a little. That had come from Ino, surprisingly enough. He noted, with satisfaction, that his friend had been right. If they send these two against you, it's because they can take you, Sasuke told her. Don't call me princess or I'll do something you'll regret, the girl threatened. Oh, he raised an eyebrow, feeling the corner of his mouth twitch. Maybe he could channel Ino for a bit. So, only IG can call you that. I see how it is. As the girl turned an almost shining shade of red, Sasuke had to wonder if this is how the Yamanaka always felt when she teased everyone. It would certainly explain things. And Hinata does make it very easy. He mused, before pushing those thoughts aside and turning his head fully against the ninja that they would have to face. TCH, you want the girl or the boy? The I-1 asked, evidently having done the same thing as he did. If there's a close combat fighter, Sasuke remembered Shikamaru's words then. Make sure that she fights them, she has the advantage there, as Neji showed in the preliminaries. Not to mention that she must have prepared for that considering her match. Considering that he had seen the male ninja weaponizing his own bones, he was fairly sure that he was one such person. So, I'll take the woman, Sasuke replied, nodding to the side where the Kunoichi stood. His chosen opponent didn't stay idle though, as she sent a volley of crystal shards his way. In a second, lightning came alive at his feet. He couldn't, as was often the case, completely vanish the slight proud feeling in his chest. It was always there when he used the lightning flicker. It was like using the great fireball. It felt like a family technique to him, in a way. As he threw a handful of sparkling shuriken at the woman, he took a split second to see how the Iwaku no Ichi was doing. His mission was, after all, to help her out. As he did so, he almost felt pity for the white-haired boy. Lava was already all but raining on him. If the hostile ninja was any slower, he would have fallen with that first attack that created a small shower of magma drops. Yes, the girl could take care of herself in that match, he was sure. Now, as for his own. As he dashed again, with his opponent dodging his attack and sending her own back once more, the Uchiha wondered if he should use the technique his sensei had taught him. Kakashi-sensei had described it as an assassination technique, and while Sasuke was nowhere near good enough to use it as such, he could very well kill someone with that. He had been ready to kill Itakai, yes, but killing someone else. He didn't have much of a problem with that. For a long time, the Uchiha had thought that was a good thing. It would certainly make things easier when the time came for him to achieve his goal. However, how would the others react to that? Would they see him differently when they realized that he didn't care about taking lives? He'd seen how Iji and Chaoji had reacted to their first kills, so what would they think when they saw him not caring? Guys, Iji had told them, when everyone had been given their orders for the several possible scenarios. Do what you have to do. If you are alive by the end of this, then it's a victory for me. A resolution solidified inside Sasuke. It didn't matter if he had to kill this woman, or anyone else. It didn't matter if he didn't care about doing that. What mattered was surviving, nothing else. For his goal. For his new family of choice. Oh. Moments before, Shikamaru Nara. Their Akumonin invading one of Iji's spider had reported to them. How the little thing had managed to move from the borders of the village to them in such a short time, they didn't know, but it was a question for another time. Although, Shikamaru was sure that it was specialized on that or something. Back to the present, that little bit of news had given lots of information to Iji and himself. Especially to the satyr, it seemed, because he had immediately warned them against the dark man with white hair and many swords and the fair-skinned woman with long blonde hair. A pair that had appeared right next to where the Hokage and the other leaders were. I need you to contain the woman, Iji had said. Contain, not fight. Shikamaru's mind ran a mile a minute as he tried to come up with strategies to do just that. It was good that Iji had warned them against the chakra that the woman, and the man for that matter, had access to, which was apparently very dangerous. The fact that it would power them up was concerning though. Never, ever, underestimate one of them, their friend had warned, dead serious. Nobody had missed the meaningful look he had traded with Naruto, who gulped and nodded, as if getting a secret message. There'll be time to question them later, Shikamaru thought to himself, half surprised that Ino had been so okay with not knowing everything. He guessed that even she had her priorities set for the moment. Is there a plan? A voice asked from their side, and it was a good thing that all of them had gotten used to Shino by then, or it could have given them a heart attack. Years had passed and they still couldn't detect his presence unless he made it known. There is, we have to contain someone, the Nara informed briefly, as they continued running. Iji had given them a general idea of where to go. They were almost there, so. Just that. Kiba asked as he joined, coming right after Shino and Chaoji. Shikamaru, and the rest of them, didn't much trust the Inuzuka to help them, but Ig had been adamant that they needed all the help they could get. So, for the moment, they would give the other boy the benefit of the doubt. Ig has his doubts that even he can take care of one of these people by himself, Shikamaru told him, and was pleased to see that the information had the desired effect on Kiba, and Shino and Chaoji too. Containing, that was the plan. Shino asked, and the Nara saw his bugs already crawling over his skin. Those would have been incredibly useful for their objective, but I don't know if that will work. Shikamaru shook his head. Ig said these guys have chakra that is dangerous. That complicates things, the Aburam admitted with a frown. Guys, both of them turned towards an unusually hesitant Naruto, who was looking anywhere but at them. Concerning, because they were running pretty fast and they wouldn't put it past the blonde to run into something. Can you try, with me? Why though? Shikamaru asked. I have, that dangerous chakra thing too, he answered, looking like he very much didn't want to talk about the topic. Sharing a look with everyone present, the Nara nodded towards the Aburam. Okay, Shino said simply. Just give me a second, Naruto choked out as he took a deep breath in while one of the Kikaichus landed on his cheek. When he blinked his eyes, the blue had changed into red and his pupils had slitted like a cat's. Now he said, and Shikamaru noted that his teeth now resemble Kiba's. What the fuck? Said Inuzuka mumbled, and the Nara could only, very reluctantly though, agree. It was a very unexpected and strange thing to witness. It is dangerous, Shino muttered. It's like a poison to my bugs. So that option is out, huh? Shikamaru mumbled as his mind continued running through options. Not exactly, the Aburam replied, looking pensive. Do you have something in mind? The Nara all but demanded. Guys. The woman is coming our way. Ino called out. Where? Chaoji asked, looking around confused. His problem was that he was searching the wrong place. She wasn't moving towards them from the ground. Now, one could say that she was. Something collided against the earth some distance away from them. Good aim, Ig, Shikamaru mused with a smirk as his shadow started moving. Did you kick her over here? He had to wonder. The woman had fallen there, after all. Get started, guys. The Nara called out. Next to him, Ino snapped a hand seal for her mind-body numbing technique. She had given them a rundown through the technique when they decided on what to do, and it was perfect for their objective. Especially since Ig had warned against actively taking over the woman's mind. Naruto, meanwhile, sent a bunch of kunai with seal tags that embedded themselves around the woman. His new and modified weight seals, apparently derived from Ig's training weight ones, pinned her to the ground instantly. He didn't stop there though, continuing to send more and more. What do I do? Kiba asked, with a frown and a snarl, unsure of how to contribute. Unsurprisingly, since he didn't have much in his repertoire that would help contain a target. Shika. Neither did Chaoji, who seemed equally hesitant to join. Shikamaru opened his mouth, ready to tell them to be on guard duty, in case the women escaped their attempts. Then he paused and frowned, while he laid his body on the floor face down. What are you doing? The Inuzuka asked, looking at him strangely. The Nara was too busy thinking to reply to him, however. Driving our target into the ground, Ino answered for him, pointing out how the woman was doing the same as Shikamaru. Damn brats, they heard the Kunoichi growl and their eyes widened when red chakra started manifesting from her body. Shino, what was that idea of yours? Shikamaru asked. I would like to hear it now, he ground out before speaking again. As for you, Chaoji, Kiba, I have something else for you to do. I'll show them, princess, she thought, her eye twitching occasionally. Not only because of the annoying satyr and his equally irritating friend, but also because her opponent was proving to be more tricky than she had initially thought. He moved fast enough to avoid her attacks, even when she tried some of her larger techniques, evidenced by the now cooling pools of lava around them. However, she had prepared for opponents specifically like this. Sending another rain of molten rock towards the white-haired man, Kurotsuchi turned to regard her ally and her other opponent's fight. The boy fought much like the satyr, but there were clear differences even when they used similar techniques. It seemed that he was having trouble though, because while fast, he didn't have enough strength to pierce through the woman's crystals. Still, was that series of seals a bluff? It wasn't, I think. But this was a better outcome, if I'm right. Maybe he had an ace up his sleeve. I better not need to help him out, Kurotsuchi thought to herself with a snarl. He's the one supposed to help me here, isn't he? With a long wave of her hand, almost from the ground and moving up, she sent another wave of lava towards the white-haired ninja, who jumped over it as if it were nothing. Okay, that's it, she thought then, with a victorious grin. With another gesture, she sent a spray of the melted stone at him. Predictably, he couldn't dodge mid-air. What he could do, however, was form a shield with the bones of his very own arm, blocking it, even as smoke started coming out of the improvised barrier. Kurotsuchi clicked her tongue, even more frustrated by the fact that the lavender-clad man looked perfectly fine even after doing that. Okay, let's change tactics. With that decision taken, she put her hands in front of her face and spat out the same quicklime she had used during the preliminaries. It was most probable that her opponent knew what it did, but that didn't mean that she couldn't use it. Besides, it wasn't like the guy had come even close to touching her, so she had the time to set up some schemes. The last thing she wanted was to spend all her chakra trying to hit him, after all. Suddenly, the sound of lightning, now almost familiar to her with the battle raging beside her between the Konohanin and the woman, reached her ears much louder, much closer. She tensed up at that, her body readying itself for an attack of some kind to come her way. Instead of that, all that followed was the sound of something hitting metal a few times. When she turned, she saw the Uchiha right there, holding a kunai in his hand and a bunch of crystal projectiles on the ground. Evidently, the woman had grown tired of her opponent and decided to go for her. That, or she thought that Kurotsuchi's opponent wouldn't win. An accurate assumption, if anyone asked the I-1 Having trouble? The girl asked the now red-eyed boy. Ha, almost like the satyrs, she noted idly. She didn't spare him another glance though. She had a battle to fight, and it wouldn't do to get distracted. Maybe I should help you, she added. Good thing she had turned around again, because her opponent was already rushing at her. Any chance you have a name? She asked at the same time as she pushed him back with another lava release technique. She almost smirked when the boy paused for a split second, probably surprised by the sudden question. That gave her an opening, which she took, managing to burn his lower leg slightly with another attack. That should slow him down, Kurotsuchi thought with a grin. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. He was just as fast as before, she noticed with no small amount of shock. He uses bones, she noted then, narrowing her eyes. Is his body better than normal? A volley of shuriken cackling with electricity flew past her, hitting the white-haired ninja just as he finished his dodging move. The girl then blinked, surprised by the support. She wouldn't complain though, the projectiles had hit her opponent and given her another opening to exploit. Thought you were having trouble too? The voice of her ally reached her from behind and she felt her eyes twitch yet again. No wonder we hate Konoha, are they all this annoying? Ignoring the irritating boy, she continued her fight, sending another attack, which was dodged this time, and then spitting out more quicklime. The plan was simple: keep him away, set more quicklime and take advantage of any chance that was given to her. She was sure that with just that much she could win. The problem was, even after she won, she wouldn't be safe. Even if the Uchiha won, it still wouldn't be the case. There was an invasion going on in Konoha, and that meant that there was danger everywhere, evidenced by the fact that the distant sound of explosions continued to reach her from every direction. As she went through the motions, however, following her plan to the letter, the white-haired ninja decided to change things up. His body started showing a pattern of black lines and Kurotsuchi felt a growing sense of dread. Oh, that can't be good, she thought then. When she tried to attack again, the boy stood his ground, blocking with a bone shield once more. This time not even trying to move as he had before. The girl then noticed that her lava seemed to burn through the bone much less than before. Not good at all, she thought with a grimace. Her battle and probably many more were interrupted as a cloud of smoke appeared and a literal storm of lightning seemed to appear on top of the balconies that had been used to spectate the exam. Gigantic spiders appeared, and the Iwa ninja almost sighed in relief when it became obvious that they were on their side. I so hope that one's on our side too, Kurotsuchi prayed then when lightning continued forming and shaping where the spiders had appeared. She had enough to worry about with the guy in front of her. The last thing she wanted was to have to deal with someone even more annoying. Oh! Hiruzen Sarutobi. The fight was disturbingly even matched. Hiruzen himself could have battled the two previous Hokage for a good while before they won. That is, if they weren't brought back with the jutsu they had been. After all, when one's opponent could fight forever without tiring, without suffering wounds, then what chance did anyone have? Especially when they were Hokage level. Young Mai's fight against Rosa was actually going in her favor, but that was only a matter of time. Soon enough, the strain would get to her. A battle of attrition that they were bound to lose, all of them. Onaki, for his part, was having a remarkably easy time holding back a. However, that was to be expected, considering his terrifyingly strong bloodline selection and the more physical inclinations of the Raikage, never mind the experience aspect. There was also the fact that the older man was particularly motivated now that his granddaughter had been threatened. And Orochimaru. His student was simply spectating. Hiruzen couldn't fathom why I would join someone like that. Someone that didn't even deign to fight with him. The Snake of the Sunin was treating him like he was an underling more. Would a really lower himself to such extents just to take out Konoha and deal a blow to Kiri and Iwa? Hiruzen didn't have the time to consider that too much, however. His hands snapping together as he rose an earth wall to stop a water attack sent by the Nidaime Hokage, his sensei. He was almost happy to see the proud expression on the man. It seemed that Orochimaru had foregone the part that Kabuto had mentioned about taking away the revived people's minds. Maybe he'd decided that Hiruzen facing his old teachers with them actually being those people was worse. The current Hokage certainly felt like that was the case. That kid he heard Tobirama mention, almost conversationally, which made the situation even more bizarre than it already was. Still, Painful as it was, Hiruzen wouldn't deny feeling slightly touched by the fact that he could talk with these two once more. A feeling that was largely overridden by the ache in his heart for having to fight against them, for having to see them turned into weapons used against the village they had given everything for. Who is he? Is he trying to make this less painful? Hiruzen wondered then with a grimace. Ig Sata, the most prominent genin in the village, the Sarutobi answered before sending a volley of earthen spikes at the two of them. Attack that was blocked by tree trunks rising straight from the ground, courtesy of the Shudai Hokage. Sata. He heard his sensei mutter, and the thoughtful tone almost gave him pause. As if on cue, all fights stopped when a huge cloud of smoke appeared not so far away from them. Hiruzen let out a grin when he heard his student's confusion. He had two theories about the origin of this. It became clear when the wind took away the visual obstruction. Right there stood a gigantic trio of spiders. Hiruzen, however, paused when the central one, black as the night and with piercing red eyes, turned towards them. He was equally taken aback by the look on his student's face, and was one of the people holding up the barrier shaking. Orochimaru! Kidomaru! The spider exclaimed, being heard from everywhere in the village. You shall face our clan's wrath for your sins. What had his student done to manage to anger a whole summon clan? Hiruzen hadn't even heard of that ever happening, which was saying something. Change of plans, Orochimaru growled as he pulled out a sword in the most disturbing way possible. A snake came out of his mouth, and from its mouth came the katana. To think someone would contract the spiders of all clans. As the contractor said, Hiruzen retorted, earning the attention of everyone present. Thanks for the power-up. He paused then, delighting in the absolutely shocked expression on Orochimaru. It's greatly appreciated. Ig Sata, his student, growled then. I'm going to kill him. Oh, this genin summoned 3 elder summons. Hiruzen was slightly taken aback that it was the one that asked that, sounding genuinely curious. I'm more curious the more I know about him, Tobirama commented then before a slight smirk appeared on his mind. I like him though. That's because he was imitating you, isn't it? Hashirama asked with a raised eyebrow. You're just jealous he wasn't imitating. The Nadame paused, his eyes unfocusing as all the revived people turned sharply. You, aren't you? He finished then, although his body started running through hand seals. It seemed that Orochimaru was done, simply leaving them to chat. Hiruzen's student's attempt at restarting the battles was interrupted, however, but something else happened outside the barrier. Roughly in the same place the spiders had appeared, spiders that were now battling with the snakes Orochimaru had summoned, now had lightning flashing into existence. For a moment, Hiruzen wondered if Killer Bee had used some technique, deciding he was done fighting Ig. It could happen, and the kid had no delusions about the outcome of that match. The Sata was skilled and powerful, yes, there was no way he could do anything more than buy some time against such an opponent. The jutsu that had called their attention was one that he recognized, however, and it definitely wasn't the Jinchuriki's doing. No, Ig seemed to have unleashed his most fearsome technique to date, besides his genjutsu, that is. The lightning cackled, jumped and twisted until it took shape. The technique's cries seemed to pierce through the invasion, as if everything else was silent in comparison. Hiruzen wondered then, how would the Jinchuriki of the 8 Tails fare against such an attack? Sadly, he needed to turn back to his own battle. And maybe, just maybe, he might get to talk to 2 people he had lost long ago for a bit longer, bittersweet as it would be. Oh! Hinata Hyuga. The first time Kumo was mentioned she had tensed up. Then, the worst, the one thing she had expected, happened. They came for Hanabi and herself. Hinata wasn't sure what she was feeling more, fear or annoyance. It was good that her father was there, for once, and that he'd have escorts with them. The problem was that the Cloud had expected that, apparently. There were a lot of enemy ninja, so much so, that the two sisters had to fight to defend themselves too. TCH, so annoying, the girl Hinata was facing complained as she kept pressuring her with taijutsu. The redhead had been using a sword and, from what little the Hyuga heiress had seen, lightning release. Neither of which Hinata could afford to let her use. And I thought I was finally done holding back. At those words, Hinata took in the sight of the girl once more. She was young, that was for sure, probably only a year or so older than herself, if that. Dark skin, red hair, amber eyes. Wasn't that the description of one of Kumo's genin in the exams? Hinata wondered. It was good that she had her Bakugan on, because it allowed her to look at the rest of the battlefield that had become the balcony without actually taking her eyes off her opponent. Hanabi was facing, together with another Hyuga clan member, a dark-skinned boy. He had short, spiky white hair and dark eyes. Her father, meanwhile, was fighting an older woman. She had fair skin, which immediately set her apart from most of the Kumonin around them, if not all of them. She also had blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair. Those are definitely the descriptions everyone gave about the Kumo team in the exams, Hinata thought to herself, unsure if that was useful information. Even if she remembered all that had been said about their fighting, she wasn't sure if that would be useful. The girl had said that they had held back, if she was interpreting it right, at least. Maybe she was thinking about that to not think about how the people around her were starting to lose the battle. Hinata herself was having more and more trouble pushing back against her opponent. And, soon enough, the first Hyuga fell. That should have spelled their doom, the first sign of their loss. It didn't, however, because the cavalry had arrived. In a story, there might have been a huge group of allies stepping into the room to help. Or maybe some super powerful person that could turn the tides with their mere presence. Here, it was just two genin. Regardless of that, Hinata couldn't help the smile that formed on her face as she saw them. Akamaru rushed between legs, biting a Kumonin here or there, giving openings to the Hyuga members. Kiba ran behind him, immediately planting his foot on someone's face. Not far behind was Chaoji, who used a downgraded version of his multi-size techniques to enlarge his arm, grabbing a ninja near the door with his now huge hand and throwing them straight at her. She caught on in a split second, forcing her opponent to place herself in the way and get hit by the flying person. Good thing she didn't have a Bakugan or she would have seen that coming. Hinata wondered then, as she saw her people start regaining ground, if Kumo had underestimated her clan that much or if there was something else going on. They couldn't have believed that an almost even force would win 100% sure. Then again, they almost had won, and that was only because of the intervention of her friends. Evidently, the rest of Konoha's Shinobi force was busy with the invasion. Too bad this happened, Hinata thought as she continued fighting, joining another one of her clan's members. Hopefully Iji and Shikamaru's plan can work without me there. She had been very frustrated when she had realized that she wouldn't be able to heed her friend's call for help due to the attack on her person and her family. It was good that she was sure that the group would understand. Moreover, it was obvious that they understood, seeing as they had sent backup for her. Hope we didn't arrive too late, Chaoji said, a smirk in place that made him look quite assured of himself. A sight that Hinata was sure wouldn't have been there if not for the group. She would know, she had a similar expression and she definitely wouldn't have had it before. Didn't expect. Hinata starts, before hesitating. Would it be insulting if she said that she was surprised by the Inuzuka's appearance? Ig and Shika called for everyone. The Akimichi replied with a shrug before blocking a lightning attack with her still very big hand. It was good that the technique also made him more resistant, or he would have done a lot more than grimace at that. You make it sound like there's more surprises left. Her eyes widened when needles flew in from the now open door. A second look told Hinata that they were ice needles. And if she was correct. Indeed, in walked a boy, that looked very much like a girl, wearing a kiri forehead protector. From what she'd been told, he didn't show many expressions, but that was either wrong or he was very annoyed at the moment, because there was a very prominent frown on his face. With a wave of his hand, a shield device appeared next to him to stop an incoming attack. Targeting people for their bloodline limits. Disgusting, Hinata heard him mutter, almost growling. Yeah, don't ask me how Ig convinced them to help. I'm not sure myself, Chaoji told her before she could ask. Still, she would take the added help without complaining. And she would make sure to thank everyone in the group. Then, everyone, literally everyone, turned to the open wall on the balcony that faced the arena. There, on the other side of the Colosseum, they could see a cloud of smoke appeared. Gigantic spiders appeared too, threatening what some people considered a boogeyman for the elemental nation's ninja. After that, came the jutsu, one they had only heard about until that point. Lightning came alive, a mass of energy that would dwarf the room they all were in easily. The cackling electricity gathered in shapes that were almost indistinguishable from where they stood. The cry they gave, however, was very easy to recognize. Ig? Hinata asked, momentarily distracted by the show. Ig Chaoji nodded, sounding just as in awe as she felt. Oh. Ig Sata. This was a bad idea, I thought to myself as I fought Killer Bee. Although calling it fighting was a bit of a stretch. It was all I could do to just block his attacks and not get caught by his blades. For as ridiculous as his stance and style looked at first, it was damn near impossible to fight against. I couldn't believe it. All my skills that could be of use were active. All that I had was thrown in this fight. I had Wielder of New Ivory and Contractor of the Spider Clan equipped, feeling that they were my best bets at the moment. From what I had gathered while all hell was breaking loose, and even beforehand, just the fact that I was working with the spiders against this invasion seemed to count as fighting alongside them, which was a relief. I had activated all the skills I could that boosted me. I had unleashed the second stage of the cursed seal right from the beginning. I was fighting with my all, the extra appendages in my back doing wonders for me as they blocked swords with the thread of New Ivory and some of my own ninja wire. I wasn't even sure how high my stats were at the moment with all the stuff I had activated. And it just wasn't enough. One of the swords nicked my cheek and I had to force myself not to flinch back at that. How was I supposed to fight this guy? How was I supposed to hold him back? He wasn't even using his goddamn Baijua hacks. I hadn't expected to fight this guy alone. I had expected someone else to be there with me. To fight with me against this absolute monster. Where was everyone else? Anbu, Root, Jiraiya, someone had to come. Right. Killer Bee twisted his whole body and I felt a sense of impending doom instantly. Then, all blades seemed to align in a wall coming my way. A wall that I tried to block with my own sword and the wire held between my left hand and my 4 extra limbs. The force of his attack sent me flying, burying me inside a wall. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs and shook my determination ever so slightly. Then, the image of my friends, fighting just like I was, appeared in my mind and my resolution affirmed itself back in my mind. Instantly, I planted a hand on the ground, taking advantage of the break in the fight to do something really quick. More smoke appeared around me, together with my summons. Kumohoshi, Kumokan and Kumoiroi weren't the ones that helped my nerves the most, surprisingly enough. No, the ones that did were the smaller ones around me. Those were the ones that I wanted to try and help me with my fight. I couldn't face Killer Bee alone for much longer. "Help me with this, guys," I asked, almost desperately. I took a mental note to do something very nice for the Spider Clan in the future, because all of them charged at the Jinchuriki without hesitation. As that happened and the gigantic arachnids engaged with Orochimaru's own summons, I called on my most powerful technique besides the Void Genjutsu. I would have used those on Killer Bee, but I was 99% sure that they wouldn't work on him with his Baijua on his side. That and those techniques required too many hand seals for me to trust it then and there. No, I needed something quick and powerful. My second S-rank technique, coming right after Wit's End and before Eternal Purge. Lightning flowed through me and out. It almost hit my own summons even though they weren't even that close to me anymore. It was that big of a technique, after all. The electricity gathered, shaped and came alive. The bird constructs cried out, spreading their cackling wings and taking flight. The sacred flock had been unleashed. The chakra animals charged towards Killer Bee while the spiders jumped away, partly to open the path for the birds and partly to escape the damage they would surely face if they didn't. Meanwhile, the dark-skinned man stood tall as he was enveloped by the technique. I felt hope well inside me. That was a clean hit, surely it would. What little hope I had was utterly destroyed as the technique finished and the man stood there, unscathed. Dread was all I could feel as I saw the red chakra cloak wrapped around him and the three tails behind him. Fear gripped at my heart and numbed my limbs even more than whatever Iron Will could do. "Help the village!" I shouted for the spiders. They would be next to useless here, I knew that. Maybe with a normal Killer Bee they might have been a distraction, but with the Hakai Bee to back him up, they would be casualties at best. My hand gripped New Ivory's handle tighter and I charged back in. More lightning birds came out of my body and I was grateful for the large boost to my chakra reserves, the first stage of the cursed seal. I would need a hell of a lot of chakra for this fight, I knew that much. That, and a miracle, probably. This was bad. Very bad. They were fighting a losing battle. All of them, their combined efforts, their plans, all of them for nothing. The red chakra from the woman kept coming out of her, kept giving her strength to push through their containment attempts. At this point, she was still down due to Naruto adding more and more weight on her. At the pace they were going, he'd run out of paper and ink before she ran out of power. Worse still, they were getting weaker and weaker as time went by, and that was without taking into account the chakra they were spending trying to keep that woman still. Shino had, indeed, come through with a plan to use his Kikaichu to drain the woman of her red chakra. The problem was that his bugs couldn't take too much of that chakra without dying. Thus, the Aburam had come up with a plan to deal with that issue. Instead of sealing the chakra and keeping it in themselves, the bugs were transferring it through the group. The problem with that was that the chakra was still dangerous to them. They all could feel it burning their chakra coils, but it was the only option they had. That woman had to stay where she was, at all costs. There was no help coming their way, he knew. Shikamaru could hear the war going on around them and was suddenly reminded of the chat he'd had years ago with Iji. He'd talked to him about what'd happen if a war ever started while they were shinobi. To think it would come true so soon. There was also nothing else they could do now. The Nara had thought about trying to kill the woman, but how? They couldn't get close because they could be affected by Naruto's seals, since the boy had been forced to make them in a more simple way, affecting the area around them instead of just one target. They could use long-range techniques because whatever they had tried had failed to do enough damage to take her out or had too wide an area of effect that they were risking messing up the seals, which they couldn't afford to do. Ha! The cavalry's here! Naruto exclaimed, his voice sounding somewhat strained. Shikamaru supposed it made sense, the boy was still making more seals as time passed. The exclamation made the Nara turn his head a bit, his body still laying flat against the ground as his shadow bound the woman in that position. His jutsu might not have the strength to completely contain her, but he wasn't about to leave his friends by themselves. Besides, he needed a way to burn the chakra Shino's bugs were feeding his system. He didn't want to think what that energy would do to him if it remained inside him. Immediately, Shikamaru caught sight of a bunch of spiders the size of a human being appearing from one side. He'd seen Iji's gigantic summons appear, of course. Who couldn't, with how big they were? However, he hadn't thought he'd still have enough to send some their way. You are not playing even more of a sacrificial role here, are you, Iji? Shikamaru wondered anxiously. Because he knew that the satyr had taken a damn big risk going by himself against someone stronger than the woman they were containing. That man had looked older than the woman, bigger too, stronger for sure. The Nara didn't want to think about it too much though, because every time he did the chances of Iji being alright were right in front of him and they didn't look good. The contractor sent us here, one of the spiders announced then, before they all took some sort of stance. A moment later, a splash of liquid shot out from their mouths. Poison, if Shikamaru had to guess. He didn't have much information to go with, but Ino had already tried poisoning the woman and it hadn't done much. He supposed it still was better than nothing. Anything that helped them weaken her was good in his books. If anything, the added people seemed to enrage their target even more. Chakra started pouring out in even greater quantity. Some of Shino's bugs got caught on that and fell to the ground, probably dead. The red cloud seemed to expand more and more, and Shikamaru realized after a moment that it was gathering in some sort of tail behind the woman. He narrowed his eyes. That couldn't be good, at all. Then the woman moved. Her arms dragged themselves into a position where they could push her up. It didn't matter that she was under the effects of his shadow imitation jutsu. It didn't matter that she was under the effects of Ino's mind-body numbing technique. It didn't matter that Shino was draining her chakra. It didn't matter that Naruto had placed who knew how much weight on her. She still pushed herself up. Slowly, but even didn't last long, she pulled herself into a standing position, her movements growing faster and less hindered with every second. Eventually, she stood in front of them all, her expression the picture of wrath. Shikamaru gulped, readying himself to stand up and help his friends fight. Sure enough, the woman twisted her body, the tail of red chakra behind her sweeping the ground and destroying all the seals. They had failed. Just when he was sure she would leap at them, intent in enacting her revenge upon them, a figure appeared in the scene. A wet sound echoed through the place and the woman was sent flying, leaving a man standing where she had once been. Their target then hit a wall, causing a small person-shaped hole to appear on it. Shikamaru saw a huge gash appear on her chest, straight from one of shoulders to her hips on the other side. Blood flowed down her body but, disturbingly enough, she pushed herself off the wall, as if the mortal wound on her was nothing but a paper cut. She cracked her neck, and the Nara watched in dread as the wound seemed to close itself slowly. People have been calling me a demon for years. The figure that had just appeared spoke. Always wanted to see how I would do against an actual demon, the man said, as if he were having a casual conversation with the woman he'd almost cut in half. His gigantic weapon came down to rest against the ground on his side. So, Iji's plan worked, huh? Shikamaru thought, more than a little relieved by what had happened. Zabuza Momokai had joined their fight, it seemed. Naruto. The Nara called out, snapping his friend out of his surprised state. Start making those weight seals targeted, he told him, immediately getting a nod from the blonde. Ino, Shino, keep it up, both simply frowned as they continued their efforts. And then, Shikamaru felt useless. Everyone had something to do, even the spiders continued spitting out poison towards the woman, who was now moving, as if the attacks she was receiving were nothing but a light breeze. Which, they might have been, actually, since the arachnid's attempts barely got past the red chakra cloak. Brat, the legendary sword wielder, called out, and Shikamaru's back straightened. Make sure nobody interrupts, my brats will help too, he told the Nara, before concentrating on his opponent, who dashed towards him and met the famous blade with suddenly long, very sharp nails. He looked at the two battles for a long moment before snapping out of it and looking around. There was no one close to them, but the sounds of the invasion seemed to be closer. His eyes narrowed and he started planning. He had time. He could ensure that nobody would interrupt the fight, or, at least, nobody that wasn't friendly. He snapped at the genin that had joined his sensei, the blue-haired one that had been part of the third test with him and the one that had lost against Ino in the preliminaries. What can you do? I need to know so that I can plan how to let your sensei fight without distractions. Shikamaru was grateful that they just told him, instead of causing a fight. As he strategized, his eyes moved towards where he could see the lightning that signaled Iji's presence and fight. With some luck, his other plans had worked too, hopefully. Oh! Kurotsuchi! Her back hit one of the arena's inner walls and she was surprised that blood didn't come out of her mouth as she coughed. She'd had the fight under control, her opponent had been almost easy. A few more minutes and the guy would have been trapped inside quicklime. That would have been it. Then, she would have been able to help out the Uchiha and rub it in his face that he'd needed help. Instead, the white-haired boy in front of her had transformed into a creature with bone spikes. From there, the fight had spiraled out of her control. He'd gotten faster, stronger and, more importantly, his bone constructs had gotten much harder. Kurotsuchi's techniques didn't damage him anymore, apparently. Now, the roles had reversed. Worse still, she'd been watching the Uchiha's fight, because she would have reluctantly appreciated some help. Unfortunately, he wasn't doing much better himself. His hadn't gotten worse, at least, but it still didn't look like he would anytime soon, and that was concerning. Turning back to her own opponent, Kurotsuchi cursed herself for getting distracted. He was rushing at her and was already almost there, his shield forward/lance arm raised and ready to skewer her. Before she, and more importantly her opponent, could react, something decided to interrupt their one-on-one. Not that she minded. Stunned, the girl looked in front of her, where something had now replaced her enemy while the boy himself was sent to one side. There stood a spider the size of a human with blades on its front legs and lance-like tips on the rest of them. Does it have something to do with the gigantic spiders from before? Kurotsuchi wondered. Thanks for the save, she heard the Uchiha tell a spider that had helped him too. Looking around, the I1 realized that there were much more than a few spiders around the arena now. Remind me to thank IG later. IG Sata, Kurotsuchi realized. He is behind this then. Her eyes widened then. He was behind those huge spiders too. Just, how far ahead of me is he? She couldn't stop that last thought from forming. After all, if he could summon things like these. Her eyes moved back to the spider that had helped her, which decided to engage the bone user once more. It seemed to hold its ground much better than Kurotsuchi herself. The girl frowned. No, she wouldn't be left behind. More importantly, she wouldn't be saved like some princess. If she didn't know better, she would have thought Sata had planned all these to tease her some more. Bristling, she readied herself to join the fight once more. She was far from done, that was for sure. Just before she jumped back into the fight, however, something else happened. Two somethings, actually. One was that the woman the Uchiha had been fighting had someone else joining in on their battle. This time she recognized it instantly. It was the puppet the Sunanin had used during the third test. The other thing that happened was that Kurotsuchi's opponent was hit by a blast of wind that smacked him against a wall, not unlike how the I1 herself had been just a moment ago. What are they doing here? She thought, wondering if this was how war was all the time. Her grandfather had often told her that a war battle was often unpredictable, but this was just insane. Still, much better than how things were a minute before, that was for sure. Oh. IG Sata. Cursed seal, second stage has gone up a level. In other circumstances, I would have been happy. At that moment, however, that screen felt like a death sentence. Not because it meant anything bad by itself, really, but because I had run out of chakra. Thus, I had to deactivate the cursed seal, both stages of the cursed seal, in fact. Without the first stage's cursed chakra and the second's increased stats, I was done. No more sacred flock to pelt killer BS by Jua cloak. No more flicker spamming to attack and dodge. No more living thread to cover myself with new ivory's wire. My chakra had run out. There was little I could do anymore. As I stood there, in front of the glowing red shape of the Eight Tails Jinchuriki, I knew the fight was over. My body returned to normal and I gazed at the man, who now just stood there, looking in no hurry to finish me over. I remembered what I had written about him. There hadn't been much complimentary really, I hadn't been much of a fan of him, it seemed, what with his silly rap shtick. That had been the most important thing I had noted down besides his Baijua and his prowess with it. I had learned about a different man while in this world. In the academy, I had studied how he had earned the respect of the fourth Hokage himself, how that had given him the title of Killer Bee. We had been told many things about the hero of the cloud, indeed. Enough to respect him, just like our late leader had, and enough to fear him, for the power he wielded. Now, having faced him, having fought him, if it could even be called that, I didn't think or know I had to respect and fear this man. I respected and feared him, period. It sounded the same, yes, but it was so different it wasn't even funny. Young man, you fought well, Killer Bee said as he walked towards me. Meanwhile, I stood there. What chance did I have to escape or fight now? No chakra points left and no energy points left. If I had barely held on with everything I could use activated, what could I do now that I barely had anything? This is a fight I shall never undersell. I snorted weakly and looked up at the sky. I was almost disappointed that I was dying on a sunny day. Was it too much to ask for it to be like with Jiraiya in the series? With rain all over as if the world itself mourned me. Maybe it was. Pretensions too, I guessed. With that said, any last words? He asked then, with only one sword raised. He was far, was he going to throw it at me? Was that how I was going to go? I shall remember your birds. I smiled as the sword flew towards me. Inventory, I thought, and the sword disappeared right in front of me. Killer B's eyes were hidden from me by his glasses, but by the way he paused, I was sure he was blinking in confusion. How did you do that? He asked then, sounding more curious than anything else. You never use it in combat. Of course I hadn't. The opportunity had never appeared for that to play its part. The Jinchuriki had never let go of the swords, despite his weird style. I had expected him to, but, evidently, I had been wrong. It wasn't much. Maybe it was even just a petty attempt. However, I was somewhat happy that I would take one of his swords with me. Although, I didn't know what would happen with my inventory once I died. Still, it was worth trying. As I looked at Killer B, he pulled another sword, and this time looked intent on just dashing towards me. This time there was no escaping, I was sure. He charged, the blade moved horizontally, intent on beheading me. New Ivory met the blade, because I refused to just stand there, even if I knew fighting him was a fool's errand at this point. Twisting the sword, I tried to stab him, scratch him, something. Instead, the legendary sword was parried by his hand guard. New Ivory mastery has gone up a level. It's like you are mocking me, game, I thought with an internal grimace. I let out a resigned sigh, staring straight at his obscured eyes. He pulled both of his arms back, and besides his body, his sword still pointing towards me. His chakra cloak was touching me, I noticed. It felt like a slight burn, uncomfortable, but overall irrelevant compared to what was going on. With another sigh, I stabbed New Ivory on the ground and let go of its wire. When he lashed out again, I parried with the tanto that I took from inside my inventory and twisted it again. This time, I seemed to actually catch him off guard because I managed to make a deep cut on his right arm. The chakra cloak around him immediately started to heal him though, and soon, that little wound would be nothing but a memory. I'm not done, I told him with a grim smile. I still have some fight left in me. That's good. That last part was said by someone that was neither me nor Killer B. The sound of it would have unnerved me some time ago. Now though, it made my smile turn slightly relieved. I considered that maybe I was making the wrong assumption, yes, but I could hope. My hope, as it turned out, was well placed. When the Jinchuriki in front of me turned to regard the new voice, he was immediately hit by a wall of sand that sent him towards a wall far on my side. That was all the proof I needed. My shoulders slumped and took a deep breath in, for once being able to relax since the first explosion. Turning slightly, I saw the red-haired boy standing some distance away with his arms crossed. You can't be my friend if you are dead, Ig Sata the Sunanin told me, and I chuckled wearily. Those were definitely not the words I had expected to hear from the boy, at least not just yet. Yes, I had sent that message to Tamrai through Shikamaru, but I hadn't expected him to actually help us. It was more of a bet, really. Evidently, I should bet more. Sorry about that, I chuckled, turning to look towards Killer B, who was currently buried in sand. Powerful as he was, Gaara stood no chance against him and I was out of chakra, so I froze. Chakra points, 1328/920. Chakra points, 1336/920. Chakra points, 1344/920. What the fuck is going on? I screamed in my mind as I looked at the screen in front of me in disbelief. New skill acquired, Tailed Beast Chakra Resistance LVL1. Let's worry about this latter, I thought, trying to push my concerns regarding that last skill for later. So what if the Hakkaibi's chakra was affecting me after coming into contact with it? I had greater concerns at the moment. Like fighting the Hakkaibi's container, for one. Cracking my neck, I reactivated the cursed seal. My chakra immediately started going down again, but much slower than it would normally do so with the seal. Evidently, whatever the tailed beast chakra was doing to me, it was also boosting my energy reserves. Shame that it didn't do the same for my energy points. But, with the seal came back the cursed chakra, and that meant that the birds would fly again. Sacred Flock I activated mentally just as Killer Bee broke free from the sand in a huge explosion. My eyes grew wide as I saw another tail in his cloak. 4 tails. We can't win this fight if he keeps adding more. Everyone, hurry up. That thought gave me pause though. Why wasn't Killer Bee just going all out on us already? Why not use the 8-tailed cloak? Was there something I was unaware of? A drawback to using that? However, he was also much less annoying than I remembered him being. Was something going on here? Doesn't matter, I thought, pushing all the questions aside. What mattered was that I had to face him, that was all. I could worry about motives and reasons and what not after my village and my friends were safe. I snapped out of it just as my lightning birds hit the man, followed a second later by another sand tomb. Neither attack would do much though, I knew that. Now that Gaara was here though, and, more importantly, now that my chakra was regenerating like crazy, I deactivated the second stage of the mark. What are you doing? Gaara demanded to know, a snarl forming on his face. Giving up already? Tailed Beast chakra resistance has gone up a level. No, I replied with an anxious smile. I hoped this would work. Otherwise, this could be a very, very bad idea. My hands started running through hand seals. I knew Genjutsu didn't work very well with Jinchuriki that were in tune with their Baijua. That was because the demons would help disrupt the techniques for the containers. However, Wit's End was anti-dissipation. So, would it work? It wasn't like I had many options, that much was true. However, if this backfired, then I could very well have a rampaging Jinchuriki, or worse a Baijua, on Konoha. We couldn't win this fight though, so keep him contained. I told Gaara, feeling like I was going in slow motion instead of as fast as I knew I was going. It took mere seconds for me to make all the hand seals, I knew. However, so much hung on this, so much could be ruined if Killer Bee escaped and interrupted me, or if this didn't work, or if we were defeated. Time for another bet, I thought, finally getting to the last seal. The Jinchuriki, who had been pushing through Gaara's sand, suddenly went still. The sea of diminutive stones gathered around him and formed a tight sphere, not unlike the Sunanin's protective technique. For a tense moment, I expected all hell to break loose. Instead, there were only the distant explosions of the invasion. Are there less of those? I wondered then, as I heard them, my eyes locked on where Killer Bee was hidden from sight. Is everyone okay? My mind asked then, desperately. Everyone better be alright, I thought to myself with a scowl. Or I'll learn the impure world resurrection or whatever the fuck that jutsu is called so that I can kill them again. Thanks for coming, by the way, I told Gaara when a moment passed and our opponent didn't break out like a massive beast coming straight from my nightmares. I'll be honest, I didn't know if you would. Just be sure to keep your end of the deal, he told me, which would have been much more intimidating if what he was talking about wasn't friendship. Instead, it was almost adorable. Yin release, wit's end has gone up a level. Sure, I told him wearily. I'll invite you over for dinner and everything. Your siblings can come too, I continued, taking deep breaths. I'll invite my friends. I think you'll like them, at least some of them. I amused myself with the thought of how everyone would react if Gaara showed up at our house to hang out. Now that would be a sight to behold. I was fine with that though. It would be almost like Naruto all over again, but much more edgy. Actually, it might be like having a mix between Naruto and Sasuke, which was even funnier, not gonna lie. Tailed Beast chakra resistance has gone up a level. I didn't know what that was about, really. The Tailed Beast chakra thing didn't seem to be doing much, really. I didn't feel any different really. Maybe a little tired, but that was normal, wasn't it? I had been fighting for a while, after all. That also explained why my vision was swaying a little. It was fine though. Killer Bee was contained. Gaara had accepted my friendship and was helping. Tamrai and Kankuro were probably somewhere helping too, if I had to bet. Everything was going great. Tailed Beast chakra resistance has gone up a level. He wondered, then and there, as he watched the man with a huge sword fighting the woman they had been trying to contain, if there was any way he could have been more useful. Naruto was proud of his seals, he really was. However, at that moment, he felt absolutely useless, even as he continued drawing weight seals to place on her. Why am I not that strong? He wondered, anguished as he looked around. All of his friends looked terrible. Not only were they exhausted due to their continued efforts to stop this woman, but they also were dealing with the effects of that accursed chakra. The same chakra I'm supposed to have, Naruto thought with a grimace. He'd made a sort of deal with the fox during his time training, that much was true. The demon would give him chakra from time to time when he asked for it. After all, it benefited both of them if he was strong. That, however, had led to Jiraiya and himself finding out the effects that too much chakra had on him. Apparently, the fox could influence him more and more as he accepted more chakra. So, their little deal could get out of hand really quick, they'd realized. A deal with the devil, indeed. How'd they do it? Naruto asked himself as he looked at the blonde woman for a moment. She looked nothing like what Jiraiya had told him about his own usage of the chakra. He'd described Naruto as a crazed beast more than a human. The Kumo ninja looked to be perfectly in control to him, so. How? Angrily, he sent another kunai with a newly drawn seal so that it was as close to the fight as possible, without it being in range of the attacks that could break it, that is. This was all he could do and it frustrated him like nothing he'd felt before. It reminded him of those times, back in the academy, when he was just another useless student. When everyone was ahead of him. He hated it. Naruto almost twitched, when his anger resulted in a tickle of the fox's chakra flowing through him. Apparently, the demon had decided that even when not asked to, he would have fun. The Uzumaki didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. He was certainly leaning towards the latter though. It didn't help that Shino was pumping him more than the others with the red chakra of the woman. It felt just like the fox's but also nothing like it. It inspired the same disgust though, the same anger, the same boundless energy that urged him to do something. That something was never good though. Naruto bit his lip as he saw the woman connect a hit to the swordsman's torso, 5 cuts appearing on his clothing and skin courtesy of her weaponized nails. Maybe he could use the fox's chakra. Maybe he could try to be like her. Wasn't he supposed to be like her? What matters is who you are and what you do, he remembered then. That's what IG had told him when they'd had their chat regarding the fox. IG, who was supposed to be fighting the guy that looked stronger than the woman they were facing. "Oi, fox," Naruto called out, as he'd learned to do during his training time. "Help out here and don't mess with me," he told it, his eyes staring at the woman who seemed to start gaining ground in her battle with the swordsman. "Do that, and I'll make sure to change the Syo into something much nicer." It was slow at first, but he'd done it enough times to recognize when the fox's chakra started coursing through him. The red energy started appearing outside of him, just like it did with the woman. With that, Naruto stood, forgetting about the paper, the ink, the brush, all thoughts of seals pushed aside. It was time to fight for real now. The ground cracked under his feet and, a split second later, he was already on the woman, his fist hitting the side of her chest just as she blocked the gigantic sword with her nails. He heard the surprised sound coming from her mouth and the intrigued one that escaped the swordsman. Naruto wasn't focusing on that though. No, the fight he'd just joined was much more important. He sent a kick her way then, only for his leg to be smacked aside by one of her hands. Still, this had turned into a 1 versus 2 now, and the swordsman took advantage of that opening, slashing at her with his cleaver. Naruto recovered in an instant from her attack, jumping back in. "To think there was another one of us here, on the other side, and in control," the woman spat, looking directly at him. The blonde simply grinned at her, feeling the longer canines against his lips. "Oh, did you think you were special?" he asked back with laughter in his voice. "Are you gonna cry?" "Focus, boy," Naruto heard the swordsman say, and he almost snapped something at him. His expression grew strained though, as he realized that was the influence of the chakra in him. The man was right, they needed to take out this woman. Then he would go help IG. His brother needed the help to fight the other man with a demon. Yes. He needed to go help him. With renewed determination, Naruto locked eyes with the blonde woman. He needed to deal with her. Then, he would help IG and then they would stop this whole mess. Naruto crouched down, his hands on the ground as his nails grew a little longer, sharper. The red cloak over him grew a bit, especially over his head and behind him. Almost in the shape of ears and a tail, like the woman's own cloak. He almost felt like thanking the fox, but he needed to focus on what he was doing. He'd made another deal with the devil, and he would make sure it was well worth it. Oh! Sajuka Chaiha! He didn't know how IG and Shikamaru had done it, but they'd gotten the Suna siblings to help out. Sajuke really wanted to know how though, because from what he'd seen of the trio, they were hardly what one would call helpful. Had IG threatened the brother that he'd fought? Maybe. How scary was the satyr that he could threaten someone into betraying their village? Sometimes Sajuke thought that he should be more angry or jealous than he actually was regarding the red-eyed boy. Being in the presence of someone that was so much stronger than he was, so much more skilled, so much more intelligent, so much more talented. Surely he should feel inferior or something, right? Instead, he only felt proud. Proud that all their hard work had paid off. That all the time they had spent training had given results, even if one of them had gotten better ones. Sasuke had been there with IG almost all the way, and he'd seen the other boy work just as much as he had, maybe even more. He just couldn't bring himself to feel anything but happy for his brother. It didn't help that IG just couldn't help himself and had to be a fucking saint. Even with the hell that had become Konoha through this invasion, even with his opponent that was surely much stronger than his, even with all that was going on, he'd still managed to find time and energy to send his summons to help Sasuke. Honestly, how was he supposed to be annoyed at him, much less be angry? Still fighting the crystal user, this time together with the Sunanin that fought with puppets, Sasuke took the scene around him for a split second. One of the spiders had just spat something at the white-haired boy that had been fighting the princess. The blue-haired woman was busy dodging sparkling shurikens that Sasuke himself had thrown her way. The fight was over, both on his side and the Iwanins. Their opponents just refused to go down though, and that was annoying. Why didn't they just give up? He could have been on his way to the others, to help out. Were the group all right against the blonde woman? Was IG all right against that man with lots of swords? Had anything unexpected happened? Had any of their plans besides the Suna siblings worked? Sasuke didn't see the Sand user in the arena. Was he somewhere else? Or had they failed to convince him? He hoped for the first. They had the situation in control there, but the Uchiha didn't know how things were with the rest of his friends. He really hated not knowing that. Oh. Choji Akimichi. That's the last one, Hayashi-sama, one of the Hyuga members reported, clear relief in his voice. Some distance away stood Choji himself with Kiba and Hinata on each side of him. He'd almost been surprised when the Inuzuka had joined their group once the attack started. Granted, he'd known he had been called, for lack of a better term, but he'd doubted that he would actually listen. Then had come the second surprise of the Kirinin that had joined their fight. Again, he'd been aware that IG had a plan to get them to help, but he hadn't expected that to work either. Maybe the lesson here was to stop doubting the Satyr, Choji mused. He couldn't remember the last time IG had failed at something. Even his plan to get the Suna siblings to help had worked, if what he'd seen just a moment ago from the balcony was any indication. Speaking of, Choji had been sorely tempted to shout reassurances to Sasuke. To tell him that they were all right, at least on this side. Although, the Uchiha hadn't been there when they'd decided to split off to get Hinata's clan. It would be a small comfort to know that some of them were all right, the Akimichi was sure. Sadly, shouting information regarding anything, even if it was a victory, didn't sound like a good idea to him, and Hinata and Kiba had agreed. The trio looked around for a moment. Nobody seemed in any hurry to get out of the balcony they were in and continue fighting, although no one could blame them. Most of the people there already looked dead on their feet. Choji noted, however, that the Kiri ninja had already left at some point. Kiba. Hinata called, getting both boys' attention. You think you could go back to the rest of the group and see if they need help? I can't really leave here, and you are faster than Choji, and we may need some help here still, but, the Inuzuka hummed and nodded, catching Choji off guard. He'd agreed just like that. Sounds like a plan, what do you say, Akamaru? The boy asked his Ninken, who barked something at him. The dog looked as tired as they did, but it was obvious that both boy and canine were ready to continue fighting. Choji kind of envied them that, he may be stronger than them, but he tired much faster, evidently. Kiba Chaoji called out this time, just as the Inuzuka and his partner turned to leave. When Kiba looked back over his shoulder, the Akimichi gave him a grin. "It'll be great to have you in the group when this is over. Thanks for the help." For a moment, he looked as the other boy's eyes widened and blinked. Then, a wide smile formed on Kiba's expression before he gave Chaoji a thumbs up. Then, the Inuzuka let out a laugh that sounded, to the Akimichi's ears, relieved. "Don't worry, buddy, I got your backs," Kiba told him as he started moving to the exit of the room. "Wouldn't be the cool group if I wasn't in it, would it?" he said just as he left. After a second of silence, Chaoji and Hinata shared a look before the Akimichi shook his head and the Hyuga giggled behind her hand. "Oh! Sakura Hirano." She ran like her life depended on it, which might have been an accurate assumption, really. Sakura was focused on that and that alone, putting one foot in front of the other as fast as she possibly could. She put her everything in that one mad dash, because it was the only thing she could do. For anything else, Sakura was useless. That was a thought that had haunted her for her whole life. However, she'd just recently figured out that it was the case. During the ill-fated match-up against the Suna Kunoichi, she'd realized that she had always feared being useless. It was the reason she'd worked so hard in her grades back in the academy. It was the reason she'd refused to fail in her pursuit of one Sajuka Chiha. It was that fear, however, that had ultimately led to her being useless all the same. If Sakura had changed beforehand, maybe she'd have been able to put up more of a fight in the Chuunin exams, as the rest of the group had demonstrated. She'd joined late, however, late and reluctantly. She'd failed to train as hard as the others, she'd failed to take advantage of the opportunity the rest had given her. She wasn't even sure why, which was the worst part. She had a mission now though, and, this time, she wouldn't be late. Sakura wouldn't fail again. So she ran for all she was worth. Her arms clutched the precious cargo she carried against her chest and refused to relax the smallest bit. Eventually, she reached the wall of the arena, but, instead of stopping, she continued her sprint, this time upwards. Sakura had one objective and one objective only. The top of the arena, where the purple barrier had been placed. It was where the Kijis were supposed to be fighting, or so she'd been told. It was where the strongest people in the village were now, and that scared her. She was more scared of being useless though. Sakura had been, for a moment, elated when the spider had come to her telling her that the group needed her to do something for them. That the group needed her for something important. Then, she'd been terrified once the situation had been explained to her. In the end though, she could only be determined. She had chosen to be a Kunoichi and it hadn't been to escape dangerous situations, that was for sure. Sakura had known what she was getting into, so, as afraid as she was with the knowledge she had been given, she would still help. Help her friends and her village. Sakura would be useful. She'd done as she was told, been where she had been told to be, picked up the object she now carried, even as the fight carried on just next to her. It had been so difficult though, to ignore the battle, to ignore the invasion, but she had a duty now. Maybe it was wrong of her to follow an order that hadn't come from a higher up with such zeal. However, she had no other orders, and she trusted the group, so she followed. When she was about to arrive, she almost sighed in relief. There they were, just as she was told they would be. For a delirious moment, she wondered if they had been ordered to, but that couldn't be, right? These people were Jounin, they couldn't have been ordered by a genin, right? It was a testament to IG Sata's ability to break logic that she thought that might have been a possibility. Regardless, she ran until she stood next to them, breathing raggedly. Sakura almost dropped then and there as she reached them, having poured every speck of energy that she may have had to arrive as fast as possible. She still had a mission, however. Kakashi Sensei, she called, her words interrupted by her lungs demanding more oxygen. I have this, for. Give it here. Asuma Sarutobi was the one that answered her, looking both angry and nervous. The Jounin extended a hand towards her and she almost gave him the object. She couldn't though. The password. Spiders are better than birds, the Jounin told her with a twitch of his eye, but he didn't otherwise say anything else. Sakura simply nodded, extending the weapon towards him. IG said. Aim for the one with 6 arms, I know. Asuma finished for her with a nod. So they were ordered by IG. Sakura couldn't help but wonder, both in awe and utter shock. In an instant, the Sarutobi stood in front of the corner of the barrier where his target stood. The dark-skinned boy stared at him with clear confidence, but Sakura picked up on a slight measure of fear there. With good reason too, since she knew what that sword was capable of. It was called a legendary sword for a reason, after all. If there was one thing that could pierce the barrier, it would be new ivory. After a second, the blade was coated in chakra that if Sakura had to guess was wind in nature. All other elements were much more visually obvious when used in the chakra flow technique, as had been demonstrated by IG in a few training sessions. It was perfect. Wind chakra made the weapon they coated sharper, even more than lightning chakra. Now she knew why IG had wanted her to bring his sword here even when he was fighting an important battle himself. Piercing the barrier, taking it down, would allow their people to help the Kijis inside it. She could see the other Jounin sensei whose students had participated in the exams. Kakashi, obviously, Kuinai, Matogai. Then, a bit further away were even more people, this time Anbu. You should leave now, Sakura her sensei told her and she gulped. Yes, that would be for the better. Oh. Asuma Sarutobi. He'd almost decided not to hear the suggestion, order more like, that the spider summon had given him midway through the invasion. However, this was his father that needed his help, so he'd done so. After all, everyone in the higher-ups had heard the name IG Sata at least once, and as time passed the genin was mentioned more and more. Even his team couldn't shut up about him. Not that they didn't have reasons, from what he knew. According to them, the boy had been the whole reason they were so good right out of the academy. Asuma had taken that with a grain of salt at the start, but after some time and hearing what Anko had to say, he'd had to accept that. Now isn't the time to think about that though, he thought as his grip on the legendary sword tightened. To think I would hold on to such a weapon, a corner of his mind whispered in awe. In an instant, his chakra traveled through the sword, and he could feel how much better it was than his own weapons. It spoke of how good New Ivory's craft was, although that was hardly surprising. If he couldn't pierce through the barrier with this. He shook his head. He had to be able to pierce through it. Wonder why this kid was the priority, a part of Asuma thought as he eyed the 6-armed boy. Is he the Kidaru the boss spider spoke about? Ultimately, that didn't matter. They all had attacked Konoha, they all had worked to endanger the Hokage, his father. If all of them died, then much better. In a split second, the sword clashed against the barrier, blue chakra meeting purple. For a moment, Asuma thought it hadn't worked, the barrier resisting his attack and halting New Ivory's progress. His heart dropped and he felt his hopes almost slip through his fingers. Then, as if that instant hadn't happened, the sword went through. The sound ninja inside tried to move out of the way, but Asuma wasn't having any of that. He twisted the weapon so that the tip went into his chest, impaling the boy's heart. Asuma pulled back New Ivory. Concern filled him when the barrier held itself up even with one of its casters dead. He saw it though, slowly, holes appearing here and there in the structure. That wouldn't do, however. In an instant, he stood in front of another corner, the one that was occupied by the boy that seemed to have two heads. The boy stared back at him, clear panic in his face, but Asuma had no mercy left for these people. His own students were fighting in this invasion. He'd have to see if he could help them out as soon as possible. For the moment, however. This time, New Ivory passed through the purple wall with no resistance whatsoever. And this time, the barrier fell. Jounin and Anbu instantly jumped into action and Asuma almost sighed in relief. There would be time for that later though. For now, he had to help his father. His father, who had to fight against the Shudai and Nadame Hokage themselves. It was a good thing that the old man had a million tricks up his sleeve, what with his knowledge and mastery of jutsu of all affinities. Even then, from what he'd seen from outside the barrier, the current Hokage had been struggling even with that, especially when the Snake Sanin had joined the fight, which was understandable but concerning. Now though, there was no way that the fight could go any way but in their favor. If they could deal with the reincarnated Kages, that is. Jiraiya's presence was incredibly relieving on that front. If there was one person that could figure out a counter to that technique other than Asuma's father, it was the Toad Sanin, or so he hoped, at least. Judging by the way his father's student was running through hand seals, he'd bet that they did, indeed, have a plan. With that reassurance, Asuma dashed towards the one that had started it all, Orochimaru himself. Or, he would have, if not for what happened next. Everyone present felt the appearance of a new entity. One such that the whole place was bathed in intent that froze everyone. Asuma was reminded of the Kyuubi, all those years ago, but much different. For one, the negativity, if still there, was much lesser in this instance. There wasn't much time to ponder on that, however, because the one responsible had appeared right in the middle of it all. Jounin, Anbu, Sanin and Kages stared at the shape of Killer Bee, the Jinchuriki of the Hakkaibi. He stood in the middle of it all, both hands extended and holding on to two much smaller bodies. Asuma's eyes widened at the sight of a genin he could very much recognize. Ig Sata, it seemed, had lost his battle, even with the apparent help of the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi. Not an unexpected outcome, if those two were the only ones on that front. Did he send everyone else away? Asuma thought, horrified. He himself had been directed by the boy. So had the rest of the rookie genin, he would bet. Still, how had no one gone to help them? This ends now. Killer Bee broke the sudden silence he'd brought with himself. Do it, he said as one of his hands let go. Ig Sata fell to the ground and, half out of it from what Asuma could see, he turned. The Jounin winced at the sight of him. Not only did he look pale, but his veins could be seen with a very unhealthy dark color. If that wasn't enough to be concerned for the boy's health, the burn that laid over his eye where Killer Bee had held him was. The boy seemed to disregard all of that, however, and immediately started running through hand seals. B. What are you doing? The Raikage asked, confused and obviously very angry at whatever his brother was trying to do. You should be. Silence, brother, was all B said to that, appearing next to her and putting his free hand over his shoulder. Then, Ig Sato finished with his technique, whichever it might have been. Everyone saw then, how the Raikage's figure straightened and tensed, closing his eyes. A second later, he almost relaxed. Then he opened them and something was obviously very different. Something had changed. In an instant, two things happened. For one, a jumped into action. For another, the genin in the middle of it all collapsed. The battle had changed, yes, but it was still ongoing. Jiraiya. Nobody expected the Raikage's actions, nor those of his brother. Their ally in the whole chaos, Orochimaru, looked wide-eyed as A and B rushed at him. Well, not at him, exactly, but at his resurrected warriors. The Raikage ran towards Tobirama Senju while Killer B charged at Rosa. The assortment of ninja, Chunin, Anbu and Kid alike, didn't just stand by, of course. Strange as the Kumo ninjas' actions were, they could still take advantage of that. Once the Snake Sannin was dealt with, they could see what was up with the Raikage and his brother. Fortunately, Jiraiya, even with the commotion and the subsequent change of behavior of one of the major figures in the Shinobi world, the Toad Sage had continued with his technique. Hiruzen and him had worked on a counter to the impure world reincarnation ever since they'd heard that Orochimaru would be using the technique. Even more fortunate was the fact that they had access to Tobirama's notes on the technique to try and look for a way to counteract it. The jutsu was designed without any way to dispel it, yes, but that didn't mean that they couldn't find one regardless. It had taken both of them working together for a whole month and the technique needed a lot of hand seals and chakra, yes, but the results. When Jiraiya finally finished the long series of hand signs, he rushed towards Hashirama Senju, who was being contained between a combination of his sensei's son, Hatake and Guy. The previous god of Shinobi's eyes widened when the Toad Sage's palm pressed against his forehead. The body of the legend started disappearing into dust and, surprisingly, a smile formed on his face. "You did a good job," Hiruzen Hashirama said to Jiraiya's sensei. "I am relieved that Konoha has you." Jiraiya looked at his teacher as he all but teared up at those words, looking years younger for a moment. The Toad Sage gulped, already feeling the strain of his previous fighting and now this technique. He turned towards Tobirama, his next target, and he wondered if he had enough energy in him to dispel Rosa too. "Don't worry," Jiraiya the current Hokage told him, and he looked at him from the corner of his eyes. "I know we didn't expect to have to dispel more than two. I've already sent word to the Aburam to come and transfer chakra to you through their bugs." The Toad Sage grimaced slightly at that. Bug chakra transferring wasn't a favorite of his, but it was what it was. He'd take that over fighting against a kid forever any day. His hands started running through seals once more, preparing the technique once more. "No. My plans." Jiraiya heard Orochimaru cry out, clearly realizing that he was losing and losing fast. "You, traitors." It said something about the snake's mental state that he didn't realize he didn't have any ground to stand on with that statement. Even if he was right and Kumo seemed to have betrayed him. "I'll kill all of you, I swear." Jiraiya rather doubted that would come to pass. With how the fight was going, the snake had little chance of living, let alone escaping Konoha. If anyone asked him, it was about time that his former teammate was finally caught and justice was delivered. He'd been given his chance, and he'd thrown it away without a care. It had taken some time for the Toad Sage to understand, but there was nothing that would bring back one of his best friends. He was just lost, and there was nothing he could do to change that. That didn't mean he wasn't grateful that someone else would be the one to deal with him though. Sao Tobirama said once he was in the same position as his brother had been not so long ago, disintegrating as the jutsu was dispelled. I'm so proud of you, Sao. I made the right choice that day. Truly, what a cruel technique Orochimaru had used. Some might see it as a good thing, to bring back the dead, to be able to speak once more. However, Jiraiya disagreed. Being able to interact with them again opened wounds that had long since healed. It was like losing them all over again, he knew just from the look on his sensei's face. Moreover, one had to wonder, were they really the same people they had known? Were they just echoes? Were they merely imitations? Were they something else entirely? Disturbing, was what the jutsu was, if anyone asked Jiraiya. He may respect the second Hokage a lot, much of that coming from his sensei's own admiration of the man, but the creation of this monstrosity of a technique took away much of it. Even in the world they lived in. He shook his head, it wasn't the moment nor the place to think that. Instead, the Toad Sage focused on his chakra reserves. The Abaram bugs were already crawling on his skin, transferring energy to him so that he could dispel Rosa and mark an end to the invasion that was going on around them. While he waited, he looked to the side, watching as Orochimaru twisted and turned, snarling and cursing at everyone around him, bound with seals that he had prepared beforehand and had been given to Angu Ninja. The remaining Kage were all surrounding and containing Rosa. The Toad Sage frowned, however, when he noticed that Killer Bee wasn't around anymore. Where had he gone? Where is Bee? He asked then, turning towards Kakashi who was standing next to him with his sensei's son. They were both ready in case support was needed, but everyone else seemed to have left already, going to help with the effort to finally end the invasion. Left to deal with the other Kumo Jinchuriki, apparently Asuma was the one that answered, taking a drag of his cigarette. We still don't know what's up with that change of hearts though, he added, looking intently at the Raikage. And you just let him go. The fourth Kage will be dealt with in a moment, Kakashi replied this time, looking as he always did, as if he wasn't affected by what had happened at all. When that happens, there won't be anything stopping the Kage from fighting him, and if they try something. Besides, there's little reason to come and help here, only to continue attacking. Something is going on, summarized Asuma. Oh. Shikamaru Nara. He was worried. Very worried, actually. How was this woman still holding her ground? There was a legendary swordsman fighting her, never mind Naruto's weird red chakra transformation which was just like hers. Moreover, Ino, Shino and Shikamaru himself were still trying to refrain her with their own techniques. So, how? He was so going to interrogate IG when this was all done. What the fuck was up with that red chakra that Naruto and the Kumo woman and man had? Why was it so powerful? How could they counter it? That doesn't look like something I can help with, the Nara heard besides himself, and he had to agree with Kiba, who seemed to have come back. That could only mean that Hinata was safe, and that was a great weight off his shoulders, at least. The Kirigenin are patrolling around, making sure that no one comes close to interfering in the fight, Shikamaru informed him before telling him how they were doing so and of the traps they had laid out. After all, the plan was. So, you want me to help them out, right? Kiba finished for him right as he was getting to that point. Shikamaru nodded, making a mental note that the Inuzuka could be remarkably less troublesome when he felt like it. Right, good luck over here, the boy said before leaving, and Shikamaru could see the worry in his eyes as he looked at the fight. Was that real worry for Naruto and them? Was it fear for the woman? Was he worried for the village if they failed? All those questions plagued Shikamaru's mind for a second before he pushed those away. They didn't matter at that moment. What mattered was making sure that all his friends stayed alive and well. Which brought him back to the fact that he couldn't do anything to help. He'd thought he was making progress. Taking his fights seriously, learning more offensive jutsu and deviating from his family techniques. He'd thought that would be enough. Ultimately, it was all more of the same. Even if he was given a year, or two, or a decade, what would have changed? Nothing, Shikamaru realized. His training just didn't give him the tools to deal with people such as these. He knew, of course, that different people and different skills would be better applied in different jobs, but he still wanted to help. He still wanted to do something. He still wanted to fight with his friends. Not just help, not just plan. Because if that help wasn't enough, if his plans failed, he ultimately had been useless, hadn't he? No, that wouldn't do. Shikamaru needed something that gave him an edge, something to be able to participate in such fights. He needed a technique, like the one Ig had been talking about, the lightning release jutsu he'd made and used that day. Something like Naruto's red chakra cloak. And he'd get one, if it was the last thing he did. I hate this, Ino grumbled next to him, and he wholeheartedly agreed. It is rather upsetting, Shino said then, and if they hadn't known better they would have thought him indifferent despite what he said. For them, though, upset didn't quite manage to encompass what the bug user was feeling, but they understood. There, watching Naruto having to fight such a battle. Having to see as the blonde was smacked aside by the woman more than once, only to continue getting up and rushing back in. Looking as the legendary sword slashed so close to him too, and having no guarantees that the man wielding it gave a damn if he hit his ally or not. All those thoughts were pushed aside in an instant as a new development appeared. With a loud boom, a cloud of dust rose right where the woman had been. Both Naruto and the swordsman jumped back and watched intently through the floating earth, waiting for a sign of their opponent and whatever had caused the disturbance in the first place. Shikamaru's eyes looked around, trying to see if there was anyone that had passed through their perimeter and check if they were friendly or not. He didn't find anyone though, which meant that whatever that had been was either very good at hiding or was inside the cloud too. As it turned out, when the wind finally took away some of the dust, it was revealed that the second one was the correct guess. It didn't reassure him at all though, because the man that Ig should be fighting was the one that stood there, next to the blonde woman. The man that Ig had warned them was too dangerous. Then, Shikamaru froze and made his mind repeat those thoughts. That was the man that Ig should be fighting. What happened to Ig? He mumbled, eyes wide as he felt the blood drain from his face. Both Ino and Shino mirrored him, pale as he'd ever seen them. They stared at the new arrival, intently, as if trying to pry from him answers regarding the well-being of their friend. "Stop, Yujito," the man said, and his voice traveled through the whole place. "We finally got her name, huh?" Shikamaru couldn't help but think at that moment. It was somewhat strange to have been so focused on this person, so engaged in stopping her, and not know who she was, really. Regardless, he had more important things to focus on. "B-sensei?" the woman asked, clearly confused and caught off guard by the simple order. "The invasion was a mistake," he said then, this time shocking everyone else in the process. "And now Kumo ninja lives are at stake. You must help me put a stop to it. We have to tell our people to quit." "But, B-sensei." Asama's orders were. Do as I said, the man demanded then, staring right at the woman. Yujito threw his sunglasses and her back straightened in an instant. Our people's lives are already hanging by a thread. If you think we'll just let you go like that. A sword appeared between the two. Kumonin and Shikamaru had to applaud the swordsman's courage. He'd had trouble just battling the woman and with Naruto's help, but he still stood there in front of the two monsters in human bodies like he stood a chance. For a moment, the man that was supposed to have the red chakra. Wait, those are a lot of swords, Shikamaru finally noticed, now that he had a moment to focus on something other than stopping the woman. She called him B-sensei. Killer B. Ainara's eyes widened. Are you sure, B-sensei? The woman asked, ignoring the swordsman completely. When she received a nod in response, she turned to the man that was threatening both of them. I'll stay here while you stop our people then. It wouldn't do to have interferences, would it, B-sensei? Another nod followed and the man, Killer B, Shikamaru now knew, disappeared. Even with the threat he'd delivered, the Kirinin obviously stood no chance trying to stop them. As such, he'd seemed to content himself with what they'd managed. Now I have to wonder, the swordsman voiced when the place fell into silence. What the hell is going on? Shikamaru himself could only agree with that. Oh. Hiruzen Sarutobi. You expect us to believe? Danza started with a very distrustful tone, not that it was without reason. That you, Akage, were controlled by someone else. Do you think we are stupid? Hiruzen was sure that, if the situation had been any different, he'd never have allowed his old friend to speak his mind quite so freely. Especially if he took into account that there were 3 kids in the room besides himself. However, these were far from normal circumstances. I don't expect you to believe me, replied, making a visible effort to remain calm, which, given what the Hokage knew of the man, meant a lot. But that's the truth. Last thing I remember is looking at her. At this, his eyes darted between Danza and Hiruzen for a moment. A Sharingan. I hope you aren't trying to blame us, the Sarutobi voiced, and he was pretty sure that if he hadn't, the Shimura would have, but much more aggressively. There's 2 Uchiha that are alive. One is too young and inexperienced to have done this, and the other is a Takai, who I know wouldn't do this, but everyone else doesn't. Hiruzen thought to himself, making a show of considering what I was saying. Which he was, really, but not in the way everyone was. What if there's another Uchiha though? An unaccounted one. One that may have been the one behind the Kyuubi attack. It was an improbable idea, but not an impossible one. If Hiruzen knew anything about the world they lived in, it was that the improbable could very well happen. Something to think about. We can't just take your word for it. I hope you understand, Amai diplomatically pointed out. She acted as if she had always been a kid, Hiruzen noted, which was very impressive by itself. He'd seen her change in expression a moment before though, and he would bet everyone else had too. And how do you propose we go about this? A Yamanaka, Danza pointed out instantly. It was a way, yes, but not one that they would resort to in a normal case, not even an abnormal one, if the Hokage was honest with himself. Trying to get a Yamanaka inside the head of a foreign ninja was a major offense in cases like this, when they were trying to be diplomatic. Especially when that ninja was a kid. However, the Sarutobi thought it unlikely that Danza cared. He was insulted, angry and, dare Hiruzen say it, worried. Insulted because he probably thought that I was lying, which might be the case. Angry because of the attack that Konoha had just suffered and the way the unexpected addition of Kumo had put everything in danger while he had been occupied coordinating his root ninja. Worried, because the student he cared about the most was put in danger. Not only that, but the state of one Ig Sato was, at best, bad. At worst, and Hiruzen suspected this might be the case, the boy seemed to have been abnormally affected by the Eight Tails chakra he'd been exposed to in his fight with Killer Bee. The energy was a poisonous thing, the Hokage knew, but the boy had looked very bad. Either he'd been exposed to a lot more than they thought, or something else was going on. It certainly wasn't helping his old friend's mood, that much Hiruzen knew very well. The room fell silent then and there. That hadn't been the response anyone had been expecting from the Raikage. There were few possibilities for such an easy acceptance. 1. A was very confident in his mind defenses, which Hiruzen very much doubted since it was such a difficult and time-consuming skill to develop. Barely anyone outside the Yamanaka themselves and people that were trained with the only purpose of being spies worked on such a thing outside of the very basics. Even Hiruzen himself was only considered better than average regarding that skill. 2. He had found a different way to defend himself, which the Hokage doubted even more. There was a reason Yamanaka were considered almost infallible interrogation experts. If the person hadn't been specifically trained to block them off, then they just couldn't keep information from them. And finally, the third possibility was that I might be telling the truth. Honestly, Hiruzen didn't know what to think if that was the case. Who would do something like that? Not only target a kid with such a technique but to almost start another world war in such a way. And, more importantly, why? Oh. Danza Shimura. What an absolute mess, he grumbled once. It was just Hiruzen and him standing in the Hokage's room by themselves. Everyone had left. The new brat, Terumi, and the old bastard, Onaki, were already on their way to deal with the consequences of the invasion on the people they had brought. B and Ujitoni were all currently inside containment rooms sealed by Jiraiya himself while they waited for the Yamanaka interrogation to take place. You can say that again, Hiruzen nodded, grimacing as he took a drag of his pipe. I knew this would be bad regardless, but this. There's someone out there that can control Kage-level ninja. Danza nodded. It might even be more than A and B, which makes this even worse. Ah, so you saw my expression when I mentioned that, huh? The Hokage asked with a wry smile. Indeed, he'd seen it. The woman had looked horrified for a split second before schooling her features into a merely thoughtful look. Everyone that has heard anything about Yagura Karateka knows that something happened there. He changed too much in a very short amount of time, Danza mused. You think this is the work of this Madara that speaks of? He asked, disbelieving of the Madara part. Everything else though? Who knew? It's a possibility, and if this individual has been around for long, then they could be the ones behind the Kyuubi too. TCH, what a mess, Danza repeated with a click of his tongue. It really was grating on his nerves, all that was happening. Furthermore, the situation didn't seem to be getting better anytime soon. Your annoyance wouldn't have anything to do with the state of your student, would it? Hiruzen asked then, and Danza had a denial ready in a split second. Then, he paused and took a deep breath in. It might, he admitted reluctantly. Years, he'd spent years teaching and training the satyr. Danza had seen the boy grow from merely a dedicated student to being the top of his year and then so much more. Moreover, the boy had something that none other in his class had, an inherent ruthlessness to those that went against him. If someone proved to be a danger, they would be dealt with. Maybe it was a stretch to say that no other had that. The clear example of this was the Uchiha, but not only did Danza not trust anyone from that clan with anything at all, evidenced by what had to be done due to their plans of rebellion, but the boy was very clearly unstable even if he'd gotten better with time. No, that boy wouldn't do. The Nara was an option, but those of the clan tended to be less than motivated, and this one was no exception, even if he'd changed a bit through the years. The Abiram was another good candidate, but he lacked on one of the most important aspects, being a leader. So, Danza's sight had settled in the satyr. And the then student had shown him that he'd been right with every single test he'd given him. Mistakes were made, obviously, but those were easily outshone by the successes. With each of those, Danza grew more hopeful and determined. Danza had finally found an heir to his cause. The great tree would continue to have the unseen ones support it from beneath. Now his chosen heir laid on a hospital bed with the medics having absolutely no clue as to how bad his condition was or when he'd wake up, if he woke up at all. It was annoying, it was infuriating, and it was concerning. It made Danza want to kill the snake himself and crush Oto, Suna and Kumo. If only he could though. What are we going to do with Suna and Kumo? He asked, his eyes going back to his old friend. Kumo could be let go if A's claims showed to have some truth behind them, but the price for them would be great regardless. Something like this wouldn't be overlooked, couldn't be overlooked. It would make the leaf look weak, and they couldn't let that happen. Not with the Kyuubi attack fresh in everyone's mind still, and now this. If they ever needed to look strong, it was now. You won't like this, but I'm thinking about giving the sand the same treatment we'll give the cloud if or isn't lying. You can't be serious. Hiruzen nodded, and it was only the fact that he didn't look happy at all that made Danza stay silent and listen to him. What could his old friend possibly use to justify such a course of action? Not only were they being deceived by Orochimaru impersonating their Kage, which already takes away some of the blame we could place on them, but some of their own shinobi helped our people. Rather important shinobi, might I add. Rosa's children, Danza said, unnecessarily as he narrowed his eyes, considering that people wouldn't be happy with just that. Moreover, Konoha couldn't very well extort anything from Suna, seeing as their poverty was the whole reason they had joined the attack in the first place. An alliance, it's the only thing that won't cause us to look weak. One heavily in our favor. Indeed, Hiruzen nodded, taking another drag of his pipe. We can push for one of Rosa's children to take over him as the fifth Kage. You are thinking of the youngest, the Jinchuriki. Danza realized, his mind starting to go over that scenario. He's the only one strong enough to not be instantly challenged. That, and because he is the one that seems to hold a modicum of respect for our people. Or rather, one of our people, Hiruzen pointed out, and this time he was smiling. Your student seems to have made quite the impression for young Gaara to have gone to his aid against such an opponent. And Danza was proud of that, even if that was rendered to almost nothing by the worrying results of that battle. You think it'll work? With Kiri being our unofficial ally, Iwa being a reluctant one for the moment, and might I add that the other two siblings helped Onaki's granddaughter. And Kumo still having to pay for what has been done, they will have no allies. Suna won't have much to do but accept whatever we tell them will be needed for us to forget this happened. Which we won't, but it will calm the waters somewhat. Danza finished then, taking a deep breath in and nodding slowly. Might be enough for the moment. Kumo though, those can and will pay a higher price. They had no reason to do this, and even if A and B were being controlled, someone else should have tried to stop them. They went along too easily. On that, we agree. Hiruzen accepted immediately, since he knew Danza was right on that account. Are you happy? Your student's first contact outside the village is going to be Akage. Quite so. Especially since another possible one seems to be Onaki's granddaughter. Danza almost smiled. It would be much better if he wasn't in a coma we don't even know he'll wake up from. That's it guys for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.